to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, April 4th, 2016, start of a brand new week, start of a brand new month. We have got lots and lots of stuff to talk about. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And there is a brand new scandal that is taking the headlines. Western media a little slow to pick up on it, but the story is so big, they finally had to come in on it, and you heard it mentioned briefly during the top of the hour news break. This is called the Panama Papers, and this is the biggest leak in history on corruption. Over in Germany, Süddeutsche Zeitung has released 11.5 million documents from a Panamanian law firm that specialized in setting up shell corporations as tax havens for the world's ultra-wealthy. And it is a huge, huge scandal. And apparently, Süddeutsche Zeitung received the documents about a year ago from an anonymous source who did not want any financial compensation or anything else, just thought it was time to blow the whistle out of this. And they've spent the last year digging into this with due diligence. And they did it in cooperation with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. I didn't even realize we still had many of those. Now, the top 10 banks so far exposed as helping to offshore and hide the wealth of the world's richest people are Exporta, Corporate and Trust Services, Banque de Safra Saracen, that's in Luxembourg, Credit Suisse Channel Islands Limited, HSBC Private Bank Monaco, HSBC Private Bank Switzerland, UBS AG, Coates and Company Trustees in Jersey Limited, Societe Generale Bank and Trust Luxembourg, Landsbank Luxembourg, the Rothschild Trust Guernsey Limited. So even the Rothschilds are getting burned in this one. Now this is going to turn out to be a bigger scandal than BCCI. And if you are my age, you remember what a big stink that turned out to be. Because this link is exposing this global network of crime and corruption and tax evasion by the world's richest. Now, keep in mind that many of the world's richest have become rich on the backs of the taxpayers. But they don't think they should have to pay taxes, and they've set themselves up this little system where they can evade taxes. Because after all, only the poor people are supposed to be paying taxes, right? Now, so far, they have named 140 politicians and public officials from around the world. The Western media is concentrating on our enemies like Assad and Putin and Gaddafi and Mubarak, the latter two not even being with us anymore. But apparently there are more than 214,000 offshore entities connected to people in more than 200 countries and territories. Now, so far, nobody in the United States political structure has been named. But a lot of U.S. banks, particularly in Nevada, have been caught up in this. The U.S., turns out, it's part of a giant tax evasion network as well. Now, let's look at some of the specifics here. Great Britain has been hit with the scandal. Apparently, David Cameron's father is listed on one of these shell corporations running this offshore fund that paid zero British taxes for 30 years. So this is spreading all over the place here. The King of Spain's aunt has been named as the head of one of the Panama firms in these leaked files. This is just this little private club for all the world's elite celebrities, athletes, politicians. 600 Israeli companies, 850 shareholders are listed in this leak. Down in Australia, their tax office is already investigating 800 Australians identified in this leak. It's a huge, huge scandal. Apparently, it's even reached to Xi Jinping's family in China. Everybody was on board with this, including the Prime Minister of Iceland, who's been caught with his hand in this tax evasion cookie jar. He's already made a statement. He refuses to resign, despite the scandal. And there are 4 names in the documents which are linked with the Clinton Foundation. Bidzina Ivanishvili, Prince Salman, Sultan Al Nahyan, and Petro Poroshenko, Mr. Chocolate himself. Remember when they had to refile those tax returns for the Clinton Foundation? And this law firm, Mossack Fonseca, has a very, very long history. And you can read about it. Now, Jurgen Mossack's family landed in Panama in the 1960s. During World War II, his father had served in the Nazi Party's Waffen-SS. Once in Panama, the elder Mossack offered to spy on communists in Cuba for the Central Intelligence Agency. So they've known all along what this company was doing and who they were doing it for. Now, apparently back in 2013, an Argentine prosecutor's report linked Nevada Incorporated shell companies involved in a major corruption scandal to Mossack Fonseca. And apparently there was a destruction of records involved. It's a big, big, big stink. Of course, Mossack Fonseca categorically denies that they're doing anything illegal. And a lot of this goes back to a recent story that appeared in Bloomberg about how the world's favorite new tax haven has become the United States of America. And they specifically name U.S. states such as Nevada, Wyoming, and South Dakota. So, now already they're trying to explain why American politicians aren't showing up in these news reports. Maybe it's gatekeepers. Maybe. Now the editor of Süddeutsche Zeitung is saying just wait for what's coming next because they're putting out this information in waves. They didn't dump it all. They've dumped the raw documents, but these people have been studying the documents for a year, putting together the chains of evidence, and they've released some of it. There's more coming on up. Now, one story we've seen out there reminds us all that following the U.S. invasion of Panama and the capture of Noriega for trying to blackmail George Bush, the elder, over the cocaine smuggling going on, the U.S. passed some strict laws regarding tax reporting from Panama, so maybe American politicians didn't go down there. We're not sure. But there's one thing you got to keep in mind here. The Panama Papers are just from one law firm in just one tax haven. This is the tip of the proverbial iceberg. The people of the world are getting a real wake-up call on just how corrupt all of their ruling classes have become, where the poor people are made to pay and sacrifice for all, and the rich just pull their wealth together and think it's the way the universe is supposed to be. All right, let's grab ourselves a phone call here from Clayton in Texas. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Hey, this just reminds me of the Leona Helmsley trial, where the housekeeper supposedly testified about her that she said, we don't pay taxes, only the little people pay taxes.
Yes.
And yeah, I guess it still holds true today. I've got a pile of 1099s and all kinds of garbage on my desk that I've been going through for hours and hours and hours trying to get it all straight. And I just feel really wonderful about all this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you hear the Panama Papers story, kind of makes you feel like dropping all that stuff in the shredder at this point.
If I didn't have a family and a few assets, I probably would have, but going to jail is not an option for me for that. So I just keep doing what I've got to do so that I don't, so I don't go to jail. But boy, I'm getting fed up with it. I know that. Well,
according to this German paper, they're estimating that more than 30 trillion with a T dollars in tax revenues has been lost into this scam. 30 trillion. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the Panama Papers scandal. This broke overnight when this German newspaper broke the story. It's already gone global. This is the biggest leak in history, 11.5 million documents. The documents are out there, the analysis being put out in tranches. We've only seen the first of where this is going to go. This is going to be a bigger scandal than BCCI, and it's going to remind the people of planet Earth that although they are constantly exhorted to pay their taxes, that the world's ultra-wealthy celebrities, athletes, politicians, CEOs don't. And that should anger a lot of people as to what's going on right now. All right, turning to the campaigns, as you know, we're coming up on the Wisconsin primaries. And there's been an interesting development out in Nevada. Now, if you will remember, during Nevada's Democratic primary, the caucus, Hillary Clinton squeaked a narrow win amid widespread allegations of fraud, of Sanders people not being able to get to the polls, of the polls being the same stuff we saw down in Arizona. Well, apparently, when Nevada had their state Democratic convention, some of these oddities were addressed, and Bernie Sanders looks like he's going to come out of the Nevada State Democratic Convention with more delegates than Hillary Clinton. So there are some people out there trying to redress the obvious fraud going on. Filmmaker Oliver Stone is out there saying he prays for Sanders, says Clinton's policies are all corrupt. We know that. She's a war hawk. She refuses to accept that the era of the Cold War is over. Actually, that's not entirely accurate. What Hillary and her ilk are trying to do is create a whole new Cold War, where we will be obediently afraid of the Russians and wet ourselves when we hear that word and throw our money and our children's lives into wars of conquest. I don't think it's going to work. After all the word about false flag and propaganda and Saddam's nuclear weapons and everything, I don't think that's going to happen. Let's grab ourselves a phone call. Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Glenn, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. What's going on?
Okay. Yeah, about this scandal and these leaks. What's the name of it again? I forget the name of the scandal.
Well, we're calling it, it's being called the Panama Papers. Everywhere that you go. The Corbett Report just did their take on it. This is all over the independent media. The corporate media is sort of grudgingly acknowledging it, but they're trying to spin it that this is all Vladimir Putin, and it was Bashar al-Assad, and all these other people, and they're not talking about how David Cameron's father got caught up in this mess, or the American banks that are already implicated. This is just getting started. It's been less than 24 hours, and this is really going to take off.
And it certainly sounds like a blue light special bonanza for people who would want to drag the corrupt rich to justice. But I have one concern about this.
What's that?
And that is, it sort of relates to something you always say about, the national boundaries serving the purpose of fire doors or bulkhead doors on a ship. And that is, this cuts across, this is very much a globalist exposure of these dirty nationalists who use national boundaries and national banking policies to hide their money so they don't have to pay taxes. And it actually sort of besmirches the notion of nation-state sovereignty and that separate. In other words, it was the separateness that, in this case, it didn't function as a fire.
Well, it didn't, because this exists in the global economic network, and that was one of the first things that saw national boundaries come down. And one of the articles that we linked to, they actually have a graphic interactive map of this immense network all over the globe. And yeah, they were just hopping across national boundaries as if they didn't exist. And they were basically setting up all these shell companies inside of shell companies inside of shell companies because they thought it was going to prevent anybody from following the trail all the way through to who really owns certain massive assets. And that didn't work because of this leak.
The side that I see is that it allows people to say, see, this national sovereignty thing is a bad thing because they can use national sovereignty and the rights of the national banks to protect protect the.
Well, I take the exact opposite position here, and again, it's because globalism came first to the economy before it started coming to immigration and our regular physical boundaries. I mean, we were hearing economic globalism going back to the early 1990s, and it immediately got us. One good example, of course, is 2008, the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud, because the borders had already been dropped for economic activity around the globe. That's what took a catastrophe inside the United States of America and made it a problem for Europe and a bunch of other places. If anything, this is another argument to put those sovereign borders back up.
Okay, I hope you're correct. Yeah, and I hope, and I hope that this does see some significant offenders brought to justice. Although I'm also concerned about and it should be followed through on. Don't get me wrong. I'm not arguing against it. I'm just saying I'm concerned about things like selective enforcement and lesser perpetrators falling on their swords for their uppers and things like that.
Well, those things can always happen, but this is not an indictment of the individual perpetrators or even the law firm. This is an indictment of a global system that allows the world's ultra-rich to not pay taxes and dump the tax burden onto ordinary working people who cannot afford it anymore. That's what this is. It's a system. It's a systemic problem, and it has to be dealt with. And people should be getting very, very angry about this right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now then, Bernie Sanders supporters held a massive Occupy CNN protest in front of the CNN building in Hollywood, which I've been to myself. It actually figures into the Vince Foster story. And they're basically protesting because CNN is giving a lot of airtime to Donald Trump and his antics, but CNN is quite obviously biased in terms of giving Hillary Clinton more coverage than Bernie Sanders, and they're a little upset about it, and I don't blame them. I mean, Bernie Sanders has been gaining on Hillary Clinton. If it wasn't for the superdelegate scandal, this would be a horse race right now. Now, interestingly enough, the Gateway Pundit is predicting Ted Cruz will be out of the race by April 26th. At that point, it will be obvious he has no chance of reaching the 1,237 delegates needed to win the nomination on the first ballot. So we're heading into a brokered convention, unless Cruz steals Wisconsin, which from the sudden reversal in the polling numbers may be what is about to happen. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call. James in Ohio, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I guess you've heard the good news. Since both parties in the United States have so thoroughly disavowed free and honest and open elections, we can immediately cease all the wars that we've started on the basis of spreading representative democracy and liberating the people and ending dictatorships. I mean, I think it's great news. Since we're a dictatorship, we can't very well go around spreading democracy.
Well, the U.S. likes to spread democracy anywhere where the democracy is going to work in their favor. They love democracy when their leaders get elected, and they hate democracy when the people's leaders get elected. We saw that in Iraq and Libya and a bunch of other places like that.
Now they can, the Middle Eastern dictatorships, they can just say we just have superdelegates and the party decides the candidates and that's it. I mean, you can't very well say, do as I say, not as I do. I mean, I guess they can.
Sure they can. They have all along,
Of course, I'm being facetious, but...
this Panama Papers is another example of that, where we're going to tell you to pay your taxes. We aren't. We're super rich. We don't have to pay taxes, but you, by golly, better pay your taxes or you'll be in trouble. And, again, when you look at the fundamental model of democracy, we're supposed to choose our own leaders, and to those leaders we choose ourselves, we give our consent to be governed. If we're not choosing our own leaders, there is no consent, and the contract is broken. I mean, fraud negates consent, and so at this point, these two political parties are operating without the consent of the American people.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see how all this turns out in the next year or so.
Yeah, I think so. It is interesting times, no question.
Who was the woman that was famous for saying only poor people pay taxes?
I think it was Loretta Helmsley, if I recall the phone call.
Yeah, Lorena or Loretta. Yeah.
Lorena Helmsley. One of the. I mean, they all have the same attitude. I mean, look at how many people are caught up in this scandal. This is a common phenomenon of the ultra-rich. Taxes are for the poor people. They're for you working stiffs. That's your place in this world. to work and give us wealth and breed new workers and soldiers. That's all you're good for. We're the Eloi. You're the Eloi. We're the Morlocks. We're in charge here. You're our food.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all your good work, and that's all I have for you today.
All right. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. Now then, we are hearing from third sources that the National Enquirer is going to come out with yet another report on Ted Cruz's cheating scandal. And they're looking at this story about the phone records of Deborah Jean Palfrey and whether or not Ted Cruz is in there. Now, somebody in Ted Cruz's office, we don't know who, was a member of the Ashley Madison website. So that's coming as well. Now, I want to urge caution here. On April 1st, which was April Fool's Day, somebody ran this story about Ted Cruz being on the billing records of the D.C. Madam. And they put up a scan, and I confirmed from my own copy of Palfrey's phone records that page is real. But it's being misread, because where they circle all the entries for Texas, that's not where she was calling. That was where she was calling from. And the numbers associated with those calls are like over in Orlando, Florida. It absolutely does not constitute any kind of proof of a link between Ted Cruz and the D.C. Madam. Now, maybe somebody was just being stupid, or maybe it was an April Fool joke, but I do want to be very cautious about people looking at this, and I'm seeing this story, unfortunately, on way too many independent media websites right now, where they're holding up this paper and say, see, it's Texas, it's got to be Ted Cruz. No. And it could be a maneuver by Cruz's people to discredit the whole story. Remember the tactic of poisoning the well? Put something out there that looks good but is provably false, and then just say, see, it's all a bunch of nonsense. Now, over in Tennessee, there's apparently a big stink regarding the state's 14 at-large delegates who were not assigned in the March 1st primary. They're going to be selected by the party's executive committee. Now, Donald Trump won the Tennessee primary, and many of the delegates were directly elected at that time. Now, supposedly, Trump's campaign had a deal with party leaders to fill the remaining at-large slots with Trump's share of the vote. Then things got ugly when the party leadership informed the Trump campaign they'd only get 6 of the 7 delegates that they were supposed to if they apportioned according to the vote results. And then, apparently, last Friday, the party leadership in Tennessee told Trump that they were only going to get 4 of the delegates, and they're going to be assigning the others where they think they ought to go. And here we have this other situation where the party leadership is saying, we don't care what you, the people, want. What you want doesn't matter. You are here to pay taxes so the world's ultra-rich don't have to. You're here to breed new workers and soldiers, and that's all you're good for. And that's coming from the party leadership. Now, Karl Rove, in this article out of Investment Watch blog, is dropping hints. There's a secret candidate coming in to rob Donald Trump at the convention. And Cruz is already out there saying that in a brokered convention, they shouldn't consider anybody who's not currently a candidate, because he sees the writing on the wall coming on in. Now, Paul Ryan is still over in Israel, and he's out there talking to Israel's government about the U.S.-Israel alliance needed now in light of ISIS and the Iran's threat, and he's over there in Israel. I wonder when the last time Paul Ryan visited Flint, Michigan. But he was over there last week, and at that time I said, is Paul Ryan getting the blessing of Israel to make a grab for the nomination at the GOP convention? And here we are today. Politico.com is saying the top Republican leadership is talking about Paul Ryan as the installed nominee at a brokered convention. They might as well just hand Hillary the keys to the White House right now and be done with it. But I'll tell you one thing is very obvious this election cycle. We don't have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We don't. We're not choosing our own leaders. It's this little self-anointed clique picking the leaders out of their own group. And that means when they do come down and say that we have to pay taxes so that the world's ultra-rich don't have to, that we're in taxation without representation. our representatives, our leaders that we want are being blocked from the top levels of government. And in that little schoolhouse in New Hampshire that I went to as a kid, I was taught that taxation without representation is valid grounds to fire the government. Now, Debbie Wasserman Schultz is facing stiff competition this election cycle. Tim Canova, a progressive law professor, is taking on Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Now, Obama came on out and endorsed Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's been carrying Hillary's water for her. Debbie Wasserman Schultz is the one who arm-twisted most of those superdelegates into pledging undying fealty to Empress Hillary I. And following Obama's endorsement of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, money started pouring in to her opponent. $500,000 in the first 3 months of 2016. There's definitely an anti-incumbency, anti-friend of Israel, anti-corruption fever sweeping this nation. And we're already getting the excuses for the questionable numbers we're going to start seeing in the rest of the primaries and the general election. Story out of Raw Story. The aging voting machines threaten election integrity. That's going to be the new excuse when the official totals don't seem to line up with the polls. Oh, well, the machines are old. They probably made some mistakes, but it doesn't change the official outcome one bit. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call from Max in Texas. Aloha, Max. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I had two things actually I wanted to talk to you about. The first one's more serious than the other one, though.
Okay.
The first one is the relationship that China has with their centralized bank. How is it possible that they can have that and still be a BRICS member and be at odds with the United States for currency?
Well, I think China's central bank is one of the founders of BRICS. And China's central bank wants to break away from the Western-centric, dollar-centric system.
Certainly, but aren't they considered one of the countries underneath the Bank of International Settlements also? Or am I assuming they are?
Well, I don't know the exact relationship between China and the Bank of International Settlements, but you know something, they could simply say, you know, we're canceling the deal. There's nothing that says a relationship with the Bank of International Settlements has to last forever. Usually these arrangements are kept as long as they are profitable. I mean, even the United States Federal Reserve, Congress still has a right to revoke its charter at any time. And all it would cost them would be $1 billion returned to the private central bankers, which in this day and age is not a whole heck of a lot of money. But the Federal Reserve maintains the slavery of the American people because they're very generous donors to congressional campaigns. But technically it could be shut down at any minute.
Okay. And had you ever heard that the BRICS monetary system was actually Rothschild influenced or owned?
I hadn't heard that. And I'm sure the Rothschilds are trying to gain control over it, but the main point of the BRICS system and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and various others coming along is they're tired of all the world's global commerce going through Wall Street and being forced to use and borrow at interest U.S. dollars, and that's what they're breaking free of.
Understandably. And to your knowledge, how many countries are free of the Bank of International Settlements?
I'll have to look it up, but I do know that I think there are only 3 nations that are not currently enslaved to privately owned central banks. And they're pushing really hard to make that enslavement complete because they figure a generation from now, the schools will have raised a new generation of people who don't know that there was another way of running national economies. I mean, when the Federal Reserve was created here in the United States of America, all of the schools stopped teaching about King George III's Currency Act as a prime cause of the American Revolution. And it was rebranded into tea in Boston Harbor and Paul Revere's Ride and all the rest of it. And the real motivating factor for the revolution, the predatory banking system, that's just not taught at the elementary school level anymore. You have to be in advanced history courses inside college before you start getting that information.
I think you've done a lot of help with that. I mean, I didn't know much of it at all. And then the kooky thing I wanted to ask you, and you can shut me off if you want to, because I know it sounds harebrained, but there was an urban myth that it started out that if you type in Q33NY into Microsoft Office and switched it to Wingdings, And they were saying that it was the flight number to one of the planes that hit.
I've seen that, and I've never been able to duplicate it. I think it's one of those urban legends, plus the fact that there are multiple wingding fonts, and, you know, they didn't include where that came from. But I put that in the category of an urban legend. Anyway, Max, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Now, turning to the war zones, emphasis on the plural, the United States is now deploying F-15s to Iceland, maybe to protect the Prime Minister from this financial scandal, and to the Netherlands. They're starting to project power. And the F-15s are very capable. If they have those fast-pack conformal fuel tanks, they can fly across the Atlantic all by themselves without bothering to refuel. Now, another story coming out of Activist Post, an ex-CIA agent has basically come on out confirming once again Obama allowed the creation of ISIS. They wanted ISIS there to act as a proxy, to be an excuse for the U.S. to go into Syria and Iraq. And apparently in Iraq, they've cleaned out another ISIS stronghold, and they found all kinds of Pentagon-supplied food rations, MREs, straight from your tax dollars into the hands of the so-called terrorist group. Now, you remember that program they tried to do in Syria where they were going to train and arm the so-called moderate rebels in Syria, and the moderate rebels accepted their weapons at your expense and promptly deserted and joined the more militant factions, including ISIS and Al-Qaeda. It was an epic, epic disaster. And so, of course, for the U.S. government, let's just do it again. And they're going to relaunch that program. I guess the thinking is sooner or later we'll get it right. Now, according to Russia's deputy foreign minister, Sergei Ryabkov, is saying that the impasse with the United States of America over Syria is what is going to happen to President Bashar al-Assad. Now, the U.S. has been saying Assad must go, Assad must go, Assad must go. They've been planning propaganda to make it look like Assad was ready to step down to weaken his support in Syria, claiming that there was a deal between the U.S. and Russia for Assad to leave. Russia has denied it. And according to Russia's deputy foreign minister, Sergei Ryabkov, it is absolutely not open for discussion. There will be no compromise. Russia says that the Syrian people have to have a choice to elect their own leaders, and if they want to elect Assad, Assad it shall be. Russia, meanwhile, has informed the UN Security Council that Turkey has been the main supplier of weapons to ISIS. Western media could care less. They don't want you to know that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are actually U.S. puppets, U.S. proxies, because they're trying to rebrand. They're trying to get you scared of ISIS again with all these false flag terror attacks, and Rita Katz is cranking up her special effects crew again. They're trying to get you to go back to being obedient and afraid and clinging to Big Daddy government so that they can take more money and more of your children from you. And I think you need to stand up and say, no, this isn't working. And I love that quote. I mentioned that, I think, on Friday. Susan Sarandon, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and her husband, Tim Robbins. And she was being interviewed, and apparently the interviewer asked her if it came down to Trump versus Hillary. Well, of course, Susan, being a woman, would vote for Hillary, and Susan said, no. A vote for Hillary Clinton is a vote for the status quo, and the status quo is not working. That's one of the best quotes I've heard in a very, very long time. Meanwhile, Israel is handing out oil rights in Syria to Murdoch and Rothschild. Small little technicality, Israel doesn't actually own that oil or the rights. The Golan Heights is occupied territory, and under international law, the property and wealth of occupied territory remains the property of the people being occupied. But Israel could care less. Israel's getting ready to declare the Golan Heights as part of Eretz Israel, and they're already selling the oil. So, now, Senator Patrick Leahy has come out and raised the point, and this is probably because of the anti-friend of Israel fever sweeping the electorate, saying that if Israel is committing human rights violations. And by the way, the UN has already come out and said Israel is the worst violator of human rights on planet Earth. I'm sure the Israelis are over there singing and dancing, "We're number one, we're number one, we're number one." And Leahy is out there saying that if Israel is carrying out human rights violations, in particular extrajudicial executions, that it's time for a cut to some of that funding that you, the American taxpayer, have been forced to give Israel all these years. Netanyahu has issued a demand to Secretary of State John Kerry to declare by imperial edict that Israel doesn't commit extrajudicial killings. Never mind the video showing it happening. The Secretary of State says it does not happen. Therefore, Mr. Leahy should take his little bill and do something physiologically impossible with it. I'm sure Netanyahu is calling up Barack Obama and saying, "You do what I tell you to do, or I'll blow the whistle on what really happened on 9/11, and it'll be worse for you than it will be for us." Because everybody expects Israel to do things like this, but not you, the United States of America. All right, we're coming up on our top of the hour news and commercial break. We'll be back with hour number 2 following these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And let's go ahead and take a phone call from Elizabeth in Connecticut. Aloha, Elizabeth.
Hi.
What's on your mind?
How you doing? Well, first of all, we have a nice snowy spring day up here, just so I can report that to you. We have about 4 inches of beautiful snow, so winter hasn't yet turned. And that's one beautiful thing for today. But I just found this video that I am shocked. The German government has produced a hate video against German people. I think you really need to post it. It is just shocking. I mean, shocking, and it's a long video. Well, I mean, it's a 4-minute.
Can we be a little more specific? How is this video made by the German government promoting hate against the German people?
It's called Be Deutsch, and it brings back the Holocaust and says that the reason why they have to take in the immigrants is because of what happened in the past. And it's like a video, a music video. And it has these mock zombies coming back from the past, and it says, that we, German now, we are proud not to be proud. And it has a little girl using foul language. I mean, you have to see it to believe it.
Well, can you send me the URL, and I'll put it up there? And first of all, the whatever supposedly happened in Germany in the 1940s all happened before we were born. Okay, and the people of Germany.
Much of it is fabricated.
Well, it almost doesn't really matter at this point. It's that far in history. The people of Germany today have nothing to do with whatever did or did not happen in the 1940s because they weren't alive yet. And it is absolutely shameful for the government of Germany to say, you have to accept the immigrants because your grandparents did something. No, I wasn't around to tell my grandparents how to behave. And this collective guilt and reparations thing, I think, has gone on far enough. And the example I like to use on this is one of my ancestors ran a station on the Underground Railroad. And they helped escape slaves from the South to get to Canada, because even though the northern states were slave states, the law said that slave was property, and if caught, they had to be returned down south. So they had to get them to Canada. And so how do you think what do you think the reaction would be if I went up to Canada and I knocked on the door of the descendants of those slaves that my ancestors helped to freedom and demanded payment for what happened back then? They'd laugh me off the front porch, and with perfect justification. Now, had I been alive back then, yes, I probably would have taken part in the Underground Railroad. But I wasn't, and I can't take credit for it. And by the same extension, I'm not going to accept the guilt for anything that happened before I was born, and neither should the German people.
I agree. And there's another blaring hypocrisy that's happening today on that very issue. The Arabs, everybody is told everywhere that the Muslims are not allowed to carry the blame for their fellow Muslims doing things, which in a sense is quite true. Yeah. But they're doing this to German people and European people. They do the same thing with the Danish and the Swedes and all of them. They knocked them over the head with a Holocaust card, which, in my humble opinion, after years of research, is mostly fabricated. And I think it is important because history is important and truth is important, and it's what makes us be able to see the world more clearly. But, that's up for somebody else research on their own to find that out. But they're using even Donald Trump in the video, like he's some evil monster, and Putin, and you have to be really uninformed to fight this, but I'm afraid that the German people have been so brainwashed by their forced government schooling. They cannot homeschool. They are forced into the system, and they're forced indoctrination for years, and I'm just afraid for them, and I think that it's a very important story. I'll try to mail it to you, but it's on YouTube. It's called Be Deutsch. I don't really know how to email to you the URL, but I would love for you to...
All right, I will try and hunt that down. Let's see. Be Deutsch.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. Achtung, Germans on the rise.
Okay, yeah, I found it, and I will. It's about 5 minutes long, right?
Yeah, like 4:38.
Okay, I will put that up, and people can look at it. But this idea that the people of Germany today are under any obligations at all for events that happened before they were born is complete and utter nonsense. This idea of shared and inherited guilt is just another tool to take advantage of them, to extract money from them, to extract concessions. I'm a great believer in personal responsibility. I think those who actually did whatever was supposed to happen back in the 1940s ought to be punished, and actually most of them are dead anyway. In fact, I think they're running out of Nazis to put in the show trials. But people who are alive today who were not alive back then, we're off the hook. We had nothing to do with it. We owe nobody anything for evils that were committed before we were born. Period. End of discussion.
And that's common sense, and I'm wondering what they're putting in the water that people can't even do this 2 + 2 computation of logic in their head.
And it is amazing.
Worry about that.
All right, well, listen, I'll put this...
Thank you so much.
All right, well, we'll put this video up next commercial break. Now then, there is a new battle zone going on between Albania and Azerbaijan in the area Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, this is an area of the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan that's been in dispute for quite some time, but all of a sudden, somebody started shooting, and the battle is escalating like crazy. And it's involved helicopters, main battle tanks, and it's going back and forth. And here's the interesting part. Nobody knows who started shooting first. Each side is blaming the other. Baku is threatening to launch a powerful strike against the Karabakh capital now because of what's going on. There had been a ceasefire, but they tried to reassert it. But the fighting is still going on. Now, this leads us to an article that appeared in Sputnik News, Why U.S. Neocons Consider Azerbaijan as Important as Ukraine for Russia. And they're going on in there saying that Azerbaijan is a stepping stone for this encirclement of Russia. And they go on out there to say, a big part of what's going on, important oil and natural gas pipelines run through this region, which opens the possibility that some third party may have fired the first few shots to break the ceasefire and get everybody going. We know false flags are a reality of life. Now, up in Ukraine, Poroshenko is telling everybody, and by the way, Poroshenko is on that list of people caught up in the Panama Papers scandal. Did you notice on the top of the hour news break? It's all Putin. It's Putin and his associates. It's a lot of other people, including Poroshenko. But Poroshenko's out there saying the U.S. has reiterated commitment to extend $335 million of your money to enhance Ukraine's security, and go on out and slap those pesky Eastern Ukrainians into coming on back and accepting U.S. puppet rule. Meanwhile, another story out of Sputnik News, South Ossetia might hold a referendum on joining Russia and sending a formal request to merge with them. So I'm expecting any second an announcement from the White House that they found ISIS in South Ossetia and we have to go in and bomb the place to get those evil terrorists. The U.S. is losing this whole situation. They won't admit it, but they are. Saudi Arabia is going to start imposing the death penalty for homosexuality and has gone so far as to say that Facebook and other social media are turning people gay, which is absurd as all these preachers here in the U.S. who are insisting that they can take gay people and pray over them and have them turn back to homosexuals. And this is one of our good buddies over there. They've certainly been doing due diligence in the bombing and killing of the people of Yemen. And the U.S. arms industry has made $33 billion off Saudi's war in Yemen in the last 11 months. It's all money, 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 money. The more blood, the more profits. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go ahead and grab another couple of photos. Mo in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thank you for taking my call. I was just going to kind of go over this, what you thought, anything new with this 28 pages. I think that the Saudis might be in there, but if everybody knows that studies this knows that there were bombs planted ahead of time, so the Saudis wouldn't have done that. What do you think? Don't these 28 pages already sanitized and they're going to?
I think they're outright fake. I mean, there were 28 pages that were classified, and some sources are saying it names Israel. But I think the 28 pages that members of Congress are waving around have been rewritten to lay the blame on Saudi Arabia as a pretext for invading and conquering Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is about to learn a very nasty lesson about being a partner in U.S. crimes around the world. And they're trying to make it something that we demand. Oh, there's 28 classified pages. We demand the declassification of those 20 pages. All right, here you go. It was Saudi Arabia. We're going to launch the war. This is what you wanted. And, you know, common sense. Out of the petrodollar deal, Saudi Arabia makes a huge amount of money. They invest much of that money back in the United States of America. They don't want to give the U.S. government an excuse to confiscate and take all that money. And if Saudi Arabia really wanted to hurt the United States of America, they don't need to crash planes into buildings to do it. All they got to do is ask for their money back, and the entire U.S. economic system would collapse. And it would be perfectly legal and moral for Saudi Arabia to do that.
But the point is they couldn't have got there to plant bombs, even if that was the case. Who planted the bombs ahead of time?
Well, yeah, and again, it was a joint U.S.-Israeli operation. The fact that the U.S. government was covering up for those arrested Mossad agents, the dancing Israelis, tells you that. I mean, Carl Cameron on Fox News in his 4-part story on the Israeli spy ring quoted a U.S. government official saying that there was evidence that linked those Mossad agents to 9/11, but that was classified by the U.S. government. They're partners in crime on this one.
Oh boy, this is you know, I don't know if you watched Cheryl Atkinson. I know I was very proud of her for what she did, but I don't think she's ever come up. Has anybody really ever come up with you know, with their theory on who planted the bombs? I mean, we think it's the neocons with Mossad, but who else could it have been?
Well, I mean, remember, I mean, there was some major construction going on in both the towers and Building 7. You know, a month ahead of the whole situation. They had a private elevator reserved to them. They didn't blend with any of the public. And the Port Authority is saying they can't actually find any paperwork about all of this stuff that was being done. But I remember there was a YouTube video out there where people who were on the floors just below where the work was going on was saying, you know, it was major hammering and dust was coming down and sifting down. So it was major work was being done. And we know there are photos of the load-bearing members of the World Trade Towers that clearly show demolition scars on them.
No question. They were painting thermite. All right, Michael, thank you.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch over here to Andrew in New York. Andrew, aloha. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I want to just say that I saw a Watch documentary, and it was about how, like, many Jews of Europe are moving to Israel. And it's like in the thousands, like 50,000, like over 2 or 3 years. And you won't believe, like, the government of Israel just like giving them like free homes in the West Bank, offering them like Hebrew classes, like they're paying everything. They're like trying to make all the Jews like move to Israel.
Well, you know, it failed miserably when they tried it in Iran. The Iranian Jews said, no, we're comfortable here. Thank you very much. We've got businesses, friends. One of the world's oldest continuously operating synagogues is inside Iran. And, you know, we keep hearing Israel saying, you know, Iran is the new Nazi power and, you know, they want to exterminate the Jews. Well, why aren't they oppressing the Jews in their own country? And they're not. Jews in Iran have such a comfortable life, they don't want to move to Israel because they realize it's going to be a step down for them.
And I saw, like, in the documentary how Israel looked, and it doesn't look like a poor country. Like, has the standards of living, like, especially, like, Tel Aviv. Like, I mean, they always see, like, Israel needs our help, and this country is, like has a better standard of living than probably in the United States.
Okay. Well, on that note, we're going to let you go here, but there's absolutely no question. Israel's a parasitic society. Now, Israel was supposedly founded to be an independent nation for the safety of the world's Jewish people. It sounds very laudable. But when you look at how much money Israel's demanding from the United States of America, from the European nations, from everybody, they got their hand out to everybody. Oh, Holocaust, give us more money. They're hardly independent. They're parasitic. They're propped up by money that's being poured into them, taken from the rest of the people of the world. That's not an independent nation. And unfortunately, the actions of Israel's government are actually making the world much more dangerous for the world's Jewish people. It's a contradiction in terms. Now then, supposedly the U.S. and Turkey are reaching conciliation regarding the Syrian Kurds. Erdogan was going after the Kurds in his own country. He's been attacking the Kurds inside Syria. It was a complication to the U.S. agenda of getting Assad out, so apparently they've shaken hands at least for the moment. Back in summer of last year, do a little flashback here, Hillary Clinton saying, if I'm president, we will attack Iran. We would be able to totally obliterate them. So Hillary wants to be a war president. She wants to obliterate Iran because that's what Israel wants. Now, other interests have something different. They want Iran underneath a U.S. puppet ruler. They want a private central bank in there. They want Iran's oil being sold only for the U.S. dollar. But Hillary's talking about obliterating them, just melting them down into a giant slab of glowing green glass. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the propagandists are trying to ramp up ISIS as the boogeyman we must all be afraid of without question. And they recently had a photo where ISIS claimed to have a picture of a young Iraqi child that had been killed by Iraq's soldiers. Well, somebody leaked the rest of the photos that went with it, and it was a staged scene involving a young boy and blood from chickens. And there are photos of the young boy covered in blood sitting up after being filmed lying down, and he's covered in blood, and you can see the dead chickens all over there. It's another fake. It's another phony. Growing provocation, U.S. to hold new military drills near South China Sea. Japanese warships dock in the Philippines at Subic, near the disputed waters. The U.S. is trying so hard to get World War III going. The North Korean envoy is saying a semi-state of war exists in Peninsula. North Korea's got a different idea. They're saying it's time to replace the armistice agreement with a true peace treaty. And that would end the friction and hostility. But, of course, friction and hostility is what the U.S. wants in Korea. We'll be right back after these few words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, we have been talking about the high cost and poor quality of the work product of America's defense industries. America's weapons are the most expensive on earth, and they have serious, serious problems. Talked about the F-35, the F-22, the Gerald R. Ford. Can't get that to work. Both the Freedom and Independence class of littoral combat ships have got problems, corrosion, drivetrain. So now we're hearing a story about the USS Minnesota. This is a $2.7 billion attack submarine, part of the Virginia class. It has been sitting at the dock for more than a year because of a defective pipe joint near the ship's nuclear-powered engine. Now, the defective part cost about $10,000, was installed near the ship's nuclear power plant. Engineers discovered this part was poorly welded in early 2015. And trying to take the ship apart to get this part out and replace it has kept the ship at the dock for more than a year. I'm going to take a guess here that we're talking about the primary cooling loop, which is not something you just go in with an acetylene tank and just do a patch weld on it. That primary cooling loop has to be absolutely perfect. It sustains very high temperatures and very high pressures. Another story, this is coming out of the Washington Post, no less. U.S. Special Operations Units are using faulty rifle sights. Now, apparently there's a company, L3 Communications, that got this huge contract to supply gun sights to the U.S. government. They're used by every branch of the military, the FBI, the State Department, local law enforcement. The U.S. government sued them. The company settled for $25 million. It's been described as a sight that almost works. But more than 4 months later, none of the sites have been recalled or replaced. They're still out there. And this one, you're going to have a hard time believing. This is coming out of Extra Public TV. The TSA decided they need some kind of an app to randomly choose left or right. I'm going to take a guess that this is the app that decides who gets the special high intensity touching or the bypass. And they didn't want to use flipping a coin or a little spinner on a wheel. So they got a randomizer app developed by a commercial software company, IBM, that cost $336,000 for an app, and all it does is randomly select left or right a few hundred times an hour. That's it. Now, the total bill for the project is actually $1.4 million, but probably includes IBM supplying the hardware and the training and the app itself. But, I mean, this is ridiculous. Get some dice from Las Vegas or get a little game spinner. It's just absolutely absurd. Anyway. Now, WikiLeaks has blown the lid off an IMF plan of literally causing crisis to force government compliance with their austerity programs. And this was a transcript of a teleconference that took place back on March 19th and basically involved these IMF officials threatening an imminent financial disaster to force them to go along with the IMF. They were going to demand Greece cut more pensions, working conditions, more work, less money. That's what the IMF, they're greedy. Now, the Greek Prime Minister is furious at this idea of the IMF acting in bad faith, threatening to disrupt Greece's fragile economy to force Greece to accept ever more draconian terms of austerity and enslavement. Now, the IMF is trying to put out this scandal. They're not denying the conversation took place. And they're out there saying, no, you can trust us. We're working in Greece's best interest. They refuse to apologize for this. But I want to remind you of a quote from the head of the IMF, Christine Lagarde. We talked about this last week, and it's pertinent to what's going on now. Quote, when the world around the IMF goes downhill, we thrive. We become extremely active because we lend money, we earn interest and charges and all the rest of it. And the institution does well. When the world goes well, and we've had years of growth, as was the case back in 2006 and 2007, the IMF doesn't do so well both financially and otherwise, end quote. That's from the head of the IMF, Christine Lagarde. She's literally laid it out. The IMF needs a world of crushing poverty and turmoil because they make more money. Remember what I used to say about war is the banker's richest harvest of debt? Christine Lagarde just confirmed that. Now, over in Great Britain, there's been a lot of concern about steel companies that are facing serious challenge from China, which is able to manufacture steel at a much lower cost. And a lot of Britain's government has come under severe criticism by the British steelmakers for not trying to save domestic industry in this rush to globalization. So Britain's government contacted China's government and said, we need you to deliberately not send any more steel here to keep our voters happy. China instead slapped a tariff on steel coming from Britain to China. It's a trade war. Trade wars have a bad habit of turning into real wars. Now, here in the United States of America, BNSF Railway has furloughed 4,600 employees nationwide. Companies based in Fort Worth, most of their business is freight shipping. And this tells us shipping of freight, raw materials, manufactured goods, other commodities has slowed down even more. It's a very telling indicator. Hancock Fabrics is closing the remaining 185 stores nationwide. They've had to file for bankruptcy. They're going to be gone. Over at Government Slaves, they're reporting retail job cuts here in the U.S. spiked 41% in the first quarter of this year. Now, some of it is to be expected because there's a lot of temporary hires for the holiday shopping season, which turned out not to be that great. And these people do get let go in January. But this is a number that is well above that, indicating that long-term retail employees, people who've been with these retail outlets for years, are also being let go. Another story coming out of Government Slaves, 30% of bank jobs are under threat. Let's all feel sorry for the poor bankers. Now, Austria is getting ready to deploy troops at the Alpine border to stop refugees trying to get into Austria coming through Italy. And by the way, that's a rough trip. I've been through the Alpines on train through Austria. That's a rough trip. But still, Europe is turning away from this whole immigration thing. And by the way, I did find that video. I did post it to WhatReallyHappened.com. This is the German government telling the German people, you have to let the refugees in because of the Holocaust. And I hope the German people will stand up and tell the German government, we're not part of that. We weren't alive then. We're dealing with the here and now and today and the harm that this flood of refugees is bringing to Europe, to our country. Apparently, protesters have burned the European Union flag over in the streets of Dover. Big protest going on there. Now, Dover is near where the Channel Tunnel comes out, coming over from Calais. And so there's been a huge influx of refugees there. All right, we're going to take another commercial break. When we come on back here, today is a sad anniversary. We're going to be talking about the assassination of Martin Luther King when we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. I just got a reader email, somebody watching on BAM User, asking if that was Hillary behind me, and yes, it is. It's my Hillary Nutcracker, which is a humor item, and my roll of Hillary Clinton toilet paper, and believe it or not, that was in the local stores here in Hawaii before the Democratic primary. So, a little bit of an observation there. By the way, it's very lousy toilet paper. Okay, getting on back to the serious news. It was on this day in history that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel. And I put up my story about some research that was done by a gentleman named Ted Wilburn, who is sadly no longer with us. And what he did is he went on out to the exact same location where the assassination took place, and he took some very wide-angle photos. Now, we've all seen the photo that was snapped immediately after Dr. King was shot, where all the witnesses are all pointing in the exact same direction. There's no confusion. And, of course, every time you see that picture, it's always captioned, witnesses pointing to the rooming house window where James Earl Ray fired from. But with the wide-angle view, it becomes very obvious that's not where they're pointing. They're pointing at the roof of the building next door. And it's another indicator that, like so many other assassinations in our nation's history, there's been a cover-up. And I keep thinking back to James Earl Ray, who was allowed basically to die in prison of an illness that would have been easy to treat had he been allowed out. Now, the reality is they've never been able to prove that the shots that killed Dr. King came from the rifle that was planted on James Earl Ray, for a very simple reason. The rifle planted on James Earl Ray had a manufacturing defect that left a deep gouge on every bullet fired through it. And the bullets recovered from the body did not have that gouge. And James Earl Ray's lawyer was trying to get a new ballistic test, and the FBI was stalling, and they said, well, James Earl Ray's rifle wasn't properly cleaned, and that's where the gouge came from, and basically stalled it until James Earl Ray passed away in prison, at which point the judge declared nobody else had standing to challenge the official verdict. Isn't that how it always works out? Now, speaking of not being charged, story coming out of Blacklisted News, there's been another questionable police shooting. Police shot and killed an unarmed black man in the head. The cops were trying to claim that the gentleman by the name of Clark tried to grab an officer's gun. Witnesses are saying that this guy was already handcuffed and under control when he was shot. They grabbed for my gun has become the catch-all excuse when the police kill somebody. Now, here's another story. This is coming also out of Blacklisted News, and it's from Idaho Falls. There was a woman, Amy Alzak, could not find her 12-year-old son, got worried, asked the police to try and help find the kid. And they were looking for him all day, and finally they found the son. He was alive and well and perfectly safe, and the mother called the police and said, we found the kid. You can call off the search. Thank you very much for your help. But it wasn't over. The police came over to talk to the kid, and this officer picks the kid up and slams his face into the trunk of a car, smashes his face in, breaking his teeth. If you call 911, you are taking your life in your hands. Meanwhile, down in Venezuela, the head detective of Interpol has been arrested and charged for smuggling 769 pounds of cocaine into the Dominican Republic. That's a lot of cocaine. That's a lot of cocaine. Turns out that those people with the badges and the uniforms are bigger crooks than the crooks are. Now, getting on over to the political correctness nonsense that is sweeping our universities. Over at American University, Washington College of Law, there was a student who put up a note saying, all lives matter. That should be a truism. But the AU Law faculty just absolutely freaked out. Nearly 60 members signed a letter saying this is intolerance to say that all lives matter. This is in response to the statement, Black Lives Matter, which is itself intolerant because it places one racial group as superior to the others. The expression Black Lives Matter is an intolerant one. It implies white lives don't matter. And this student was out there trying to correct that by saying all lives matter, which is absolutely true. And the faculty at this school just went ballistic. No, it's only the Black Lives Matter. You white people, you don't count anymore. It's amazing. Now, as you know, after all this spying and the NSA reading all your emails, they're building a database and who can travel and who can't, the no-fly list, and we know it's hideously expensive, and a lot of the people who are on those no-fly lists don't deserve to be there. They're there because of misspellings, vindictive TSA workers. They simply happen to have a name that matches another name of somebody who might be suspicious. Now it's finding out that this State Department database that vets travelers to and from the U.S. has major gaps in its security. And cyber defense experts are thinking that hackers already got in there to alter the data and steal visa information to forge travel documents. I mean, it's just absurd. So let's talk a little bit about human-caused global warming, because Al Gore and his minions are screeching and crying and still trying to say, well, NOAA says it's the hottest year on record. Over in West Michigan, drivers are advised to take extreme caution in their snowy weather. An Allegan County sheriff is issuing a warning. They've got winter weather. There's a freeze warning on the Hudson Valley for today. Dutchess, Ulster counties are under a winter weather advisory from 2 a.m. until 6 p.m. today, which means it's pretty much already over. North Platte River Valley, 4.5 inches of snow today. Another story coming out of the Boston Herald. Don't look now, but it's snowing again. Many Bay State residents are waking up to a fast-moving snowstorm today with another on its way tomorrow, bringing potentially damaging wind gusts and near-record low temperatures. Today's storm is expected to drop 1 to 3 inches of snow across much of the area before pulling away by lunchtime. Cold week ahead, snow possible on Tiger's home opener on Friday, according to the National Weather Service. Spring snow belts Great Lakes and Northeast. Winter just is not going away. Another story coming out of Government Slaves, 3 snowstorms to hit the Northeast, heating oil prices to spike. Because people don't want to freeze, so let's rack up the price on the heating oil here. And here's where it gets really interesting. Snow fell on the Caribbean island of Guadeloupe. This is the first time snow has hit that island in recorded history. First time in history. Colorado ski resorts reporting the snowiest it's been in the last 50 years. And I got a lot of emails from people. I got an email from Ottawa saying it's going to be minus 18 degrees centigrade this week. The high is only going to be minus 7 centigrade. And if you look at the reader's letters section, I was getting photos from all over of serious snow all over the Northeast. All right, we're going to grab, well, no, we're almost to the news. I'll leave that phone call till the last time, till the next segment. We're coming up on our top of the hour commercial and news break. And when we come on back, we're going to be talking about the latest developments in the vaccine scandals and this absurd desire for us to be drawn away from anything natural in favor of a commercially produced chemical concoction, which we're assured is somehow superior to what Mother Nature is providing for us. And remember I talked about that concept of coevolution as an argument against that claim? Well, it's getting even more ridiculous now, and we're going to be talking about that as soon as we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Now, many years ago, I worked in advertising, and it's kind of an inside industry idea that trumpets the success of an ad campaign to sell manufactured infant formulas. And the success they had convincing mothers across the nation that what came out of a factory and a laboratory was somehow better for their baby than what the mother's own body produced. And we know that there are things in mother's milk, certain hormones and enzymes, that are necessary for proper development, and they are not in those commercial formulas. But the advertisers went on out there and said, really, what's in this can and bottle is better for your baby than what your body is producing. And apparently that kind of attitude is still persisting. Natural News is reporting that, let me see, I seem to have misplaced something. Okay, I misplaced a story here where basically there is now a push. Oh, here it is. It's a pediatric journal says to stop calling breastfeeding natural. This is in the journal Pediatrics, and it's calling on the industry to stop saying that breastfeeding is natural because it gives the impression that natural parenting practices are healthier than what's coming out of those corporate factories. And this is just getting silly. Now, as you know, there was a big stink over this documentary, Vaxxed. Got pulled from the Tribeca Film Festival, had its premiere at another theater last Friday night to a sellout crowd, has landed a distribution deal. They're not going to be able to keep it from coming out. And now, again, over at Natural News, they're getting ready to stream, for free, a multi-part documentary on cancer cures. And they're expecting they're going to be viciously attacked by the entire cancer industrial complex. They want you as part of their revenue model. They don't want you going on out and saying, 25% of all cancers spontaneously go away. I'm just going to roll the dice on this one because I can't afford the cancer treatments. They don't want you looking at alternative cancer treatments that might actually work. Remember, the GC-MAF was being promoted or being researched as an actual cancer cure, and then all of a sudden all the researchers working on it started dying. I mean, when you look at the toxic tap water pouring out of faucets in Flint, Michigan, and thousands of other cities across the United States, you come to understand your health is not a factor in the decisions of the government and the corporations. How much money they can get from you is the entire agenda. And if Americans were all healthy, the entire medical industrial complex would collapse. Go back to that quote by Christine Lagarde. They need turmoil and crises in the world to maximize their profits. The same attitude applies to the medical industrial complex. They need you to be constantly chronically ill so that you will buy more product from them. Another article, this is coming out of the refusers.com. The pertussis vaccine insert, that little piece of paper with the very tiny print the doctors and nurses hope you don't bother reading, lists autism and sudden infant death syndrome as serious adverse effects. It's all a scam. We have an article that we linked to WhatReallyHappened.com from Riv.com. It's a video of a mother, Elisa Nethery, whose baby died after 13 vaccines in a single day. Now, this is getting personal because without naming names, we just found out a family friend, their child has been diagnosed with autism, and they wanted this pregnancy. They worked very hard to get it, overcoming some medical issues, and all of a sudden they had the baby, and now they're finding out the baby has autism. Autism is now hitting 1 out of every 60 children in America, unless you live among the Amish, who refuse vaccinations. They don't get autism. They don't get sudden infant death syndrome. They don't get microcephalic babies. I remember not too long ago, the vaccine industry found one child living in Amish country who came down with autism, and they were out there saying, see, it's not the vaccine. Then it turned out the kid had been adopted into an Amish family after getting the recommended vaccinations before the adoption. It's a scam. Prior to this whole vaccine silliness, autism rates were 1 in the tens of thousands. Now it's up to 1 in 60. There's clearly something going on. But as long as it makes money, that's all that really matters. Isn't it? Isn't it? Now then, story from zcom.org talking about the nuclear reactor near New York City, the Indian Point Energy Center in Westchester, New York. First opened in 1962. And the headline is, "A Fukushima on the Hudson." Because this reactor is located in the 6th most densely populated urban area in the world, the New York metropolitan region, just 30 miles north of Manhattan Island, and the center of the American economic system. And the Indian Point Energy Center is showing problems and leaking. It's reached the point where the New York Governor, Andrew Cuomo, is saying it's time to close this reactor down, and he's not alone. Bernie Sanders is saying it's time to shut this down. It makes no sense to be running these kinds of risks after we saw what happened at 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and at Fukushima. Story coming out of Mainichi, it's a website in Japan. 5 years after the Fukushima meltdown, the wild game animals are still showing cesium contamination too high for them to be made commercially available. It just goes on and on and on. Down in Miami, environmental groups are threatening a lawsuit against Florida Power and Light's Turkey Point nuclear plant, which is also leaking radiation in excess of what is considered safe. And there's another article that came on out. We linked it to WhatReallyHappened.com. 10 devastating radiation accidents they never tell you about. There have been some bad ones out there. But they're too busy reporting on American Idol and Miley Cyrus and her wrecking ball and Paris Hilton. And they include the disaster they had out there in Southern California at that facility, the Santa Susana Field Laboratory that was near that recent natural gas blowout. You should read that one. They have been very, very careless with these things. All right, let's grab ourselves some phone calls here. Jim in New York, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How are you, Mike? How's everything?
Everything's fine.
Good, good. I'm calling about the story I saw that broke today about the Panama Papers.
Yes.
Are you familiar with what's going on?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We put most of our first hour on this story.
They're moving them into Nevada and the West, South Dakota,
Wyoming. Yeah. It's turning out, and that's going to be the real big scandal. Now, the American politicians are struggling to isolate themselves from this scandal, but it's turning out there are all of these banks in the U.S. that were part of this system of hiding wealth to dodge taxes.
Amazing. And they brought it back here in this country. Wouldn't it be great if the Republic took them out here in our own turf?
It would be nice, but if they haven't done anything about the obvious crimes on Wall Street, they're not going to touch any of these others. The bankers are ruling this country at this particular point. And
not for long.
Well, remember in the French Revolution, the bankers got their trip to the guillotines before the royalty. That was not a coincidence. We'll be right back.
Shorter.
Okay, we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And one of our listeners just sent in an article reminding me about the family of Martin Luther King actually held a civil trial which concluded that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated by the U.S. government. And we just put it up at WhatReallyHappened.com. And you need to read the history because there's a couple of points you need to keep in mind. There was absolutely no evidence that James Earl Ray shot Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. His guilt was based on a coerced confession. His government-appointed attorney said, if you will confess, you will avoid the death penalty, you'll still get a trial, and we'll leave your family alone. They were threatening to arrest his family members as co-conspirators. And so James Earl Ray issued a guilty plea, and the judge said, okay, life in prison. And James Earl Ray said, wait a minute, that's not the deal that we had. I'm taking my confession back. And the judge said, oh, no, we got you. And they threw him in prison. The King family tried to get an independent investigation, and the government blocked it at every level. And when they started their civil trial, this tells you exactly the mindset of the government. When Dr. King was assassinated, oh, the poor, suffering King family, they were up there on TV. Let's all grieve with them over the loss of Dr. King here. When they filed the civil trial, oh, they're just attention-seeking. They want money. They're just being troublemakers, was the official story coming out of the corporate media. So, in this day and age, though, the American people are a lot more aware. They understand what's really been going on in history, and they understand that the government does assassinate people they find to be inconvenient. John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, George Wallace, Martin Luther King. They tried for Ted Kennedy at Chappaquiddick. He survived, but the political damage from Mary Jo Kopechne kept him out of the White House. Plus, more recently, a whole slew of doctors and researchers looking into GC-MAF and Negalase and its effect on cancer treatments. Negalase is a protein put out by cancer cells that blocks the body's ability to attack them. And it's an ingredient in these mandated vaccines. Why? Don't they want you to be able to fight off cancer? Apparently not. Now we're getting some more information about the Panama Papers scandal. And apparently this law firm in Panama, Mossack Fonseca, helped firms evade sanctions. Sanctions like taxes are only for us little people. For the wealthy and powerful, this is the way they get around them. And apparently, so far, Mossack Fonseca has been shown to have worked with 33 individuals and companies who were placed under sanctions by the U.S. Treasury, including companies based in Iran, Zimbabwe, and North Korea. One had links to North Korea's nuclear weapons program. This scandal is not going away. Latest word from Iceland is their parliament is scheduling a no-confidence vote for the prime minister over the exposure of his involvement in this tax avoidance scheme. Over in Ukraine, Poroshenko is insisting that he didn't break the law, that everything they did was perfectly legal. Certainly seemed underhanded. When you look at the hunger and starvation that has been brought to Ukraine by this coup d'etat, and then you find out Poroshenko is just stashing all his wealth in these tax havens, including here in the United States. $30 trillion is the rough estimate of how much tax money has not been paid. Well, actually what they do is they raise taxes on you. When the ultra-rich evade taxes, they drop the tax burden on you. That's the model of fascism. Meanwhile, we're hearing Illinois is now on the brink of bankruptcy. There's one part of the economy that's doing very well, though. Actually, two. One is public relations, lying to the public for profit. That's still going like gangbusters. Look at all those people working for George Soros, disrupting Trump's rallies. They're getting $15, $16 an hour. But there's another area, and that's gun sales. They are soaring. Gun sales broke records yet again in the United States in the month of March. The FBI did 2,523,000 firearms-related background checks during the month of March. It's a new record. Americans know what's coming. And they know who the enemy is. War is when the government tells you who the enemy is. Revolution is when you figure it out for yourself. There may be another taxpayer bailout in the near future, this one of the coal industry. And they were riding a boom a little while ago. Now, coal has hit a slump. And in the tradition of American corporations, in recent years, they're turning to the government and saying, we need a taxpayer bailout. If the taxpayers won't buy our product, just take the money from them anyway and give it to us. Now, another little story here, and this is very telling. This is from Counterpunch. How Hillary Clinton bought the loyalty of 33 state Democratic parties. And the story is about collusion between the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee that allowed Hillary Clinton to buy the loyalty, or obedience if you prefer, of 33 state Democratic parties last summer. And apparently what happened is Hillary set up this special fund, the Hillary Victory Fund, that allowed her core billionaire and inner circle donors to run the maximum amount of money allowed through those state parties to the Hillary Victory Fund in New York and the DNC in Washington, D.C. In other words, Hillary is bribing these state Democratic parties to put her ahead of Bernie Sanders. She's trying to buy the White House. That's what's going on. And if you're a Democratic voter, you should be furious, because this is not democracy. This is the rise of oligarchy or plutocracy. Anyway. Now, little article over in Raw Story. Jesus wept. There were 12 reported incidents of Christian pastors molesting kids in just the last month. This is out of Port Angeles, Washington. And according to the Crimes Against Children Research Center, 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys are a victim of child sexual abuse. And even that may be underreported, because many victims never speak up. And in some cases, like in Florida, the sexual assault is hushed up. It's quieted up. We don't want to talk about that. The church is holy. The church is the Word of God. We can't go against God. So if the clergy is molesting our little child, well, it fits into the grand plan somehow or other. Another story from Raw Story. Federal prosecutors are looking at hundreds of victims who were abused by 50 clergy over 40 years. And this is in Pennsylvania. And the prosecutors, can't seem to make up their mind if they want to bring charges or not, because, golly, if we charge the priests, we're all going to go to heck when we die and burn in the lake of fire for all eternity. More about this when we get back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about clergy sex abuse, which only a decade ago, nobody talked about it. Nobody talked about it. There have been some documentaries that have come out about it, like Max Mea Culpa, Silence in the House of the Lord, and that was an HBO documentary that talked about how priests were molesting deaf students in their care because they thought the deaf students would not be able to communicate to their parents what was going on. And it does seem to be epidemic. Now, lately I seem to be recommending a bunch of movies to you. Obviously, Vaxxed. There was the Consumed we talked about the other day. And now there's a new one. Over the weekend, Claire and I watched the movie Spotlight, which won the Best Picture Oscar. But you can be forgiven if you haven't really heard that much about it. It's not getting a lot of media coverage. Now, Spotlight is named for a special section of the Boston Globe newspaper, which were the investigative reporters. And Spotlight is a very well-done film. It's got a stellar cast, and it tells the true story of how the Boston Globe ripped the lid off the clergy pedophile scandal in Boston. Went all the way up to the cardinal. And what is really revealing in this film are all the various officials, not just in the church, but within the government, even people within the newspaper saying, no, you don't want to do this. The church is too powerful. They represent God. They do such good work. You can't scandalize them. And finally, at the point where they realize they're looking at 90 victims and 7 priests, the story finally broke and led to the resignation of the cardinal. And it's a good film. It's out there. It's on pay-per-view. And it's another one to add to your we must watch this list. All right, we're getting more and more news coming in regarding the Panama Papers scandal. Apparently there are protests in the streets in Reykjavik, Iceland. Apparently they're throwing eggs, which is certainly preferable to throwing Molotov cocktails. But it's sparking populist anger in the streets. And the Icelandic people have a very fresh memory of how they got rolled over by the bankers back in 2008. And now all of a sudden they see skullduggery happening again. And this article goes on to say that capitalism itself is facing a crisis of credibility, which would be accurate if we were in a state of capitalism, but we're not. We have descended into economic fascism, and these are exactly the kinds of evils we see in fascist economic dictatorships. And what's really ironic is that Vladimir Lenin, years and years ago, predicted that when Western capitalism failed, it would become fascistic in order to prolong its wealth and power, which is exactly what has happened. But this is going to be angering everybody. Now, here in the West, they're trying, it's all Putin, it's all those people over there, it's not affecting us. But according to the editor of that German newspaper, there's more to come. And what the people of planet Earth are having their noses rubbed in is that the economic system of the planet is rigged for the rich and powerful. Paying taxes is just for the little people, to paraphrase Leona Helmsley. You little people, you work, you breed soldiers and workers, you pay taxes. That's your place in this world. This is going to be a bigger scandal than BCCI, and you know how bad that one went. And we might see a sudden surge of financial people getting suicided again. We've been seeing it off and on over the last couple of years, people who seem to know too much about what's going on in the shadows, and they take a long walk off the top of a parking structure. We may see a surge in that. Meanwhile, we had a story last week about how chocolate, as it's sold in this country, is contaminated with a lot of toxic materials, heavy metals, cadmium, so forth. And I don't think that's why Cadbury has that name, but it's a little bit of a link. Now, I'm spoiled. When I worked in Europe back in the 1980s, I got exposed to European chocolate and European beer, and I've never been able to tolerate the American version of either one of those ever since I came back home. But there has been a growing concern that the top chocolate companies are getting their cocoa supply from companies that are using child slave labor. And there was a move to identify them in order to organize a boycott to not use child slave labor to harvest the cocoa beans. But up in San Francisco, a federal judge has ruled that the nation's largest chocolate companies have no duty whatsoever, no obligation to disclose if their cocoa suppliers are using child slave labor. You don't need to know that. Just buy the chocolate and eat it and be happy. You don't need to know about the child slave labor. All righty, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. John in Barbados, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Continuation, Michael, thank you for having me on, of the Panama Papers. What I think we need to look at is the way that this financial scandal doesn't just involve the banks and the big corporations. It goes right into government.
Oh, of course it does. I mean, they've already identified 12 heads of state are involved in this, and I don't think we've seen the totality of that list yet.
No, I think there's more to come.
Yes.
But if I was the guy who released the information to that newspaper and the newspaper did the digging, I think I'd already have my house set up on the far side of the moon, because the amount of money they can throw at this scandal to find out who released all the information is going to be phenomenal.
Well, at this point, finding out who the leak was is kind of irrelevant. The horse is out of the barn. The damage is already done, and I'm sure that the various economic miscreants in this scandal are struggling to find ways to isolate themselves. And again, like I said, we may see some financial people getting really, really depressed or having accidents with small aircraft to try and break the chain of evidence, tying these powerful individuals to this scandal. And again, you need to keep in mind, this is one law firm only and one money laundering tax haven operation. It's just the tip of a global iceberg. And a lot of people are going to be looking at other law firms and other sheltering companies, whether they're in Panama or anywhere else, or in Nevada, Wyoming, or South Dakota. Because now we're finding out the rich and powerful really don't pay any taxes. They don't feel they should have to. That's your job.
Well, I mean, what I'm thinking of, they say, all roads lead to Rome. In this particular instance, it's looking like, or it's working out to be all roads lead to the City of London and the Rothschilds.
Well, the Rothschilds are caught up in it. They're on the top 10 list of top 10 banks that were involved in all of this money laundering and moving stuff around. And it's mostly European banks, and the Rothschild Bank is in there. So they're now caught in this mess.
Well, the thing is, the Rothschilds own or control most of the world's central banks. So, we're looking at a real huge, I think this has got to be the biggest scandal in history.
It should be. It's going to be bigger than BCCI. And, we're already seeing the corporate media is trying to shift the blame and say this is all Russia and it's all a lot of nonsense and you don't need to know what's going on inside the bank accounts of the rich and powerful. Just leave those poor people alone, blah, 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 blah. But this is this other article I was talking about is absolutely right. This discredits the idea of capitalism. It's not a fair, balanced system. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. We're supposed to pay all the costs of society, and the rich are supposed to siphon off all the gold. Anyway, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, John. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program on this Monday. We're still getting more and more stuff coming out of the Panama Papers scandal. People are digging into the documents and they're finding all kinds of things. We're now getting an update. Apparently there are now mass protests in Reykjavik, Iceland, calling for the Prime Minister to step down. They don't even want to wait for the vote of no confidence. They want him out. And that's going to be a sentiment around the world. When ordinary people who are struggling under heavy taxation and declining standards of living learn that the world's elite, en masse, are all getting away with not paying taxes at all on their fabulous amounts of wealth. Yeah, this is going to anger a lot of people, and it should. It really should. Now, you've been hearing on the corporate media all day that Vladimir Putin is caught up in this Panama Papers scandal. And as it turns out, that's not entirely accurate. MSN is reporting that in point of fact, Vladimir Putin's name does not appear in any of the records. His involvement is implied because some of his friends were caught up in the scandal. Therefore, he must be guilty. Well, that same thing could be applied to Hillary Clinton, because some of her close associates and donors, including Poroshenko, are named in the documents. So sauce for the goose, sauce for the gander. If Putin is guilty by association, then so is Hillary Clinton. Now, apparently over in Great Britain, along with the embarrassment to David Cameron that his father is involved in this mess, apparently 3 former Conservative members of Parliament and 6 peers are involved in this Panama Papers snafu. This is not going away. It's a huge, huge scandal. And again, this is just one tax haven, just one law firm, and there are tens of thousands all over the globe who have been part and parcel to the looting of ordinary, honest, working people to make the money junkies that much richer. Now, we talked about this next story last week about how teachers here in the United States are being trained in coercive interrogation techniques that can be used to force false confessions. Now, what does that have to do with education? It has everything to do with dictatorship. That was the case in Nazi Germany. The teachers would browbeat the kids and get confessions about what was going on in their home so the Gestapo could kick down the door. It's just absurd. Now, here's another story about political correctness run amok. There's a gentleman who has started up a new company to produce dress shirts. And he started it because he was tired of going into stores and trying on shirt after shirt after shirt that never fit. So he set up this company where you log into the website and you put in a couple of key measurements and you would get a custom-fitted shirt in the mail. And it works very well. But in order to produce a better fit, there's a box on there to check your ethnic background. And, of course, the instant he put that on there, oh, he's racist, this is a racist company, he's profiling and the rest of it. Now, it does produce a good product, and providing that information is part of getting a shirt that fits. Now, calling this racist or profiling is ridiculous. It's not like he's handing out traffic tickets. They're buying a shirt, and they want it to be comfortable, and they want it to fit, and this is a great idea. And while the politically correct morons are going to continue their liberal fantasy that all humans are identical, bland, cookie-cutter-shaped life forms, the reality is we are all born different. And different lines of human evolution have produced noticeable differences in our bodily structure. These differences aren't good or bad. They are simply the reality that this company is trying to adjust to in providing the best possible fitting shirt to their customers. But reality is something the politically correct liberals seem to have difficulty dealing with. I keep thinking back to that law school that denounced a sign saying all lives matter as being racist and intolerant. Apparently over in San Diego, there was a whale watching ship coming back into port, crashed into the pier. The tourists and passengers all had to scramble. It does happen occasionally. I remember many years ago when I was working down in Sydney, Australia, and I used to go out on the Bounty, the one that was built for the Mel Gibson movie of the Mutiny on the Bounty, which is like big history for all the people in Australia. And it was a lot of fun. I love tall ships. Claire and I were married under sail. We did Fiji by tall ship. And after a few times, they even let me take the helm of the Bounty, because I do know a little bit about rag setting. But there was one time when, and I was on the pier waiting to go out. My hands are clean on this one. And the Bounty was coming on in, and I could tell it was coming too fast, and it was pointed at the wrong direction, and it grazed the dock and tore off a piece of the rigging called the jumper strut, which is back by the stern. It made a huge noise, and it was this weird thing. You could just see it coming and coming and coming, and you knew it was going to hit, and nobody could do anything about it. So that's what's going on there. All right, so we're coming up to the top of the show. We need to keep an eye on this Panama Papers scandal. Those who are part of this tax haven money laundering scam to defraud their own people and their own governments are going to be trying to obfuscate this, cover it up, make it go away. We need to keep this one alive. We need to keep it in the forefront of the independent media. Because the people of planet Earth, not just the United States, but planet Earth, need to understand that they have been living in an illusion of everybody paying their fair share of these sky-high taxes, and then we find out that only the little people are paying the sky-high taxes. Celebrities, politicians, the ultra-rich, the elites have created themselves a global tax haven system where they just funnel all their money in there and they never pay taxes on it. And it does undermine the concept of capitalism, for those of you who think we still live in a capitalist country. It undermines the concept of democracy, because I don't think ordinary people are going to vote to give the ultra-rich special tax breaks, are they? So this is very undemocratic. That this exists at all tells you that you live in a dictatorship where you're expected to provide the wealth, the labor, the new workers, the new soldiers, and carry the burden of the entire nation on your shoulders, while the ultra-rich just get a free ride, living like potentates or sultans in their palaces of treasure. And you should be angry. You should be very, very angry, because this system did not come into existence overnight. It's been operating for years, and before it came into existence, there were others just like it. This has been going on all along. The rich don't want to pay taxes. They want you to pay the taxes for them. And look at how high taxes are for us. That German newspaper is promising or dropping hints of new revelations to come, and unless the German government shuts them down, I think we're going to see a lot. Now, all of the 11.5 million documents are online in a couple of different locations, so you can search them for yourself and find what's there. But this German newspaper and this group of international investigative journalists have been doing this research for a year. And they've only let out a portion of what they've found so far. So we need to keep this alive. This is an important story. This could be the most important story this year outside of the presidential election itself. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to do the Jim Goddard show up in Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices, share what you know with everybody that you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.